Welcome in, and thanks so much for joining me. So, in today's episode, I'd like to have a brief reflection on what I think of as the habit to control the world and/or control our world versus the habit to seek to understand the world. And this recently came to mind because I've been thinking a lot about, of course, things in my own life, how I kind of am habituated to use control to try to find safety or understand myself or understand others, or to try to create like a circumstance that feels good to me. And this could be as simple as like controlling the temperature in the room. It doesn't have to be some big deal. But I noticed this bleeds over into lots of other topics, politics, ideas of like what's good for society and others, what's good for myself, my family, etc. And as I've been reflecting on this, I've just been seeing this reflected in others, in what I perceive around me in others, in conversations with friends, in conversations with mentees I work with. I think especially, at least for those of us U.S. based, for those I've been hearing, struggling with, some of the unrest we have in the U.S. That may be new to some. I'm not sure sometimes how much of that is sort of media driven, how much of that is actually taking place. I'm sure it's a mix of both, right? I'm not here to like say anything quite about that, but I do wonder that sometimes. I notice when I consume a lot of media on a certain topic, it feels like, just as an example, it feels like, the world is ending and there's this, when actually it's just a very small part of the world that something's happening in, or my world, or something I care about. And actually, compared to the rest of the world, it's quite small what's going on. That's not to diminish a certain issue or a certain conflict going on or anything like that. It's just to recognize sometimes the control part of mind, the control part of our habit patterns gets really narrow into things. But anyways, I'm kind of going off track a little bit. So basically, I've just been thinking about this idea of, what do I want to feed in my life? What ways of being, what ways of relating to myself, to others, to my place in the world, whatever that means. And this idea of like seeking to understand the world, just that phrase really started to resonate with me, because I've noticed in the past, 5 to 10 years, I've been putting a lot more energy into that way of being. I'm not very good at it, but admitting that is helpful because then I can get better at it, right? So for me, putting energy into this way of being, of seeking to understand rather than react and try to solve, fix, control, whatever terms we want to use for that, whatever verbiage we want to use, I just notice it makes me not only a happier person, it allows me to have more kindness towards myself and others, but also most importantly, it's helped me a lot in my practice of developing compassion on my chosen path, which is the Buddhist path. But I would just say, whether you're Buddhist or not, I think this applies to the development of compassion. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share some thoughts on that and see if this resonates with you. And also for those of you struggling with maybe, a lot of dissatisfaction with the status quo these days, or feeling really angry or really sad or really despondent. I'm not saying this is what's going on with you, but perhaps this is at play, or part of it is at play. And that's not for me to tell you, that's for you to decide. But I've just noticed control, fixing, this obsession with safety, for me, it's created a not so healthy dynamic in my life. Now, I do want to say one caveat here. When I say safety, I'm not talking about like basic safety of our body and life, right? Or not being demeaned to the point of suffering, right? So there's basic safety all of us need, and it's perfectly fine and of course great to seek that out. But there's this other layer of safety where it becomes very personal and how do you say it? Very driven by a very private or personal habit pattern, which now I come to see as sort of like somewhat of a cultural pattern, at least the way I grew up. And I'll just use a simple example for this. I I I currently live outside the United States. I've lived outside the U.S. for 4 or 5 years. And what I noticed many things got challenged for me in a good way, being outside of the U.S. And I happily take on that challenge. I learn a lot from it. It's helped me to understand myself and others a little bit more. But one of them was this kind of, what I call the bubble, which is the social bubble of, the space I've needed throughout my life, the physical space to feel safe, meaning like, if someone gets too close into my field of physical comfort, if they break that physical comfort zone for me, I start to feel anxious and, really what it is unsafe and to some degree. Are they going to continue to encroach on my space here? Or, it's not really fear of violence or something. It's more like space. And I really know, this got challenged for me living outside of the United States, because often other cultures, they live with lots less physical space, and actually culturally their bodies, their emotions, their minds don't necessarily require a lot of physical space. And I'd even venture to say, based on some conversations I've had with people from other places, they actually they like that lack of physical distance, meaning that they like the closeness that makes them feel, I don't know, at home or that makes them feel safe. So it's interesting here. So anyways, without getting too much into the weeds, this is just one example of something, we're not talking about like a hot button political issue or anything like that. We're just talking about like how we think of safety in our physical space. And again, if there's real danger for you, I'm not asking you to challenge that. I'm just using it as an example to open up an idea of how we get stuck in our views, our beliefs, and even I would say they become embodied. They become structures of how we sit in our body, how we use our body, all of that. And I found it really useful to open that up. We're each going to do that in a different way, according to our physical location, social location, all of that. It's going to be different for you than me necessarily, which is fine. But I think this fundamental idea of are we coming from control? Are we trying to fix, trying to solve, trying to find the perfect space that we can exist in? Or are we coming from this other, more curious, more compassionate space, I would say, of seeking to understand something? So obviously, I'm advocating for that. I'm advocating for, seeking to understand rather than control. But first, we just have to talk about the habit pattern itself. What does that habit pattern look like when we are seeking to dominate or control a situation? Now, typically, these words like dominate, control, etc., they sort of they get lobbed around onto certain I don't know how you say, like people with power, money, all of that. And yes, that exists. We don't have to go there. We can all just say, yes, there is truth to that. And I think it's just a way of being that can happen no matter our location, wherever we're coming from. If we are feeling unsafe and then we seek to control in order to find safety, we can also dominate others. We can also, maybe I'll say something different, not necessarily dominate them, but seek to dominate them. And again, I'm not really here to argue one way or another for social change or the world or anything like that. I'm more talking about our personal well-being and peace. So my question is does that make you more peaceful? When I watch the news and I get really worked up about something that's, pissing me off, it doesn't help. I notice the anger, being pissed off about something. Sometimes it's just because I think it's unjust, or I don't like what's happening to someone else or a group of people or a country in the world, or I don't like someone's idea or viewpoint or whatever. But what I notice is the anger often is coming from a lack of control, a lack of, being able to do something about the situation. Where when I focus on compassion, then this way of being where I seek to understand it starts to come out. Meaning, like, I might research it more. I might try to hear different viewpoints on it. I might try to understand both sides, because there's always at least two sides to any situation, to any conflict, right? And it's not to find out who's right or wrong. It's to seek to understand what are the underlying causes happening here. And I notice not only does that help to release control, where I'm trying to sort of find some safety for myself or another, it actually brings more ability to see a situation more clearly. And of course, from a Buddhist perspective, fundamentally everything comes down to clinging to, or I should say, doing things from a way of our afflictive emotions of aversion, attachment, and ignorance. And those, when we're functioning from those three, we're going to create harm, and there's going to be pain for ourselves and others. So, Buddhism has lots of really, really, I would say, simple, not simple to change, but simple to understand ways of relating to these. But even if we come out of those, to seek to understand is just to be curious. It's to be open. It's to be interested in others. So again, I'm trying to center this around myself to make it, not really a judgment about others, but of course, as an observation, I see a lot of people struggling with this where, they want to find out exactly who's right, who's wrong. And I see that more as a mechanism of control. I don't see that as a mechanism of compassion. Sure, out of compassion, we can also choose what's less harmful. That's really important in Buddhist practice. Often we frame, we use this word shila, which often gets translated as ethics, in very bad translations, maybe morality, but actually morality definitely doesn't fit the word shila, but even ethics doesn't really fit it, because discipline implies more a mindfulness and awareness around what's to be disregarded, like what's to be shedded or gotten rid of, and what's to be adopted. And that's really what shila focuses on. It focuses on what do we disregard, what do we see as harmful and remove from our behavior in life, and what do we adopt as helpful. And harmful and helpful, they are relative, right? They require us to seek to understand. When we use control, actually, we can't really truly find out what's harmful and helpful, because we're stuck in that narrow passageway again. We're stuck in that narrow view, which also, in my opinion, lacks compassion. So again, this isn't judgment on you or anyone else, if you're listening, whoever is listening to this, but watching this, but it's just to become more aware of these habit patterns, because at the end of the day, we want ourselves to be happy and others to be happy, and we want ourselves to be free from pain and dissatisfaction and suffering, and others to be free from pain, dissatisfaction, and suffering. I think fundamentally most people want that. They may want that more for a certain group or certain people, but either way, they want that, right? So now it's just a question of how. And this seek to understand also requires us coming out of right and wrong. It requires us coming out of black and white, not completely, but initially, right? Like I said, eventually we do need to find what we need to shed or disregard as in the way of harm, what we need to adopt in the way of help or benefit of ourselves and others. We do need to discern that, right? And of course, the Buddha, as one example, gave advice on that, so we don't have to guess, right? There's advice from not only the Buddha, but many great beings, great compassionate beings who have come to this world. There's lots of advice we could follow, but if we just follow it as a blind moral rule, we're missing out on so much richness, because we're not developing our own insight, our own mechanism of understanding. And understanding here, I'm not just talking about conceptual. It's an understanding of like seeing more and more of the truth, right? So I think I'll mostly leave it there. I just want to sort of frame some questions for you. If this is interesting, if you find this kind of topic interesting, just pose that question to yourself. Where am I functioning from control and fixing and solving? And where am I functioning from seeking to understand something? And if you think there's some merit to what I'm sharing here in this reflection, then what can help to foster more seeking of understanding in your life, both towards yourself, your own emotions, thoughts, lifestyle, etc., behaviors, and also others. What can help you to do that, and what can help you to shed more of the control mechanisms? I think first the question has to be: Are the control mechanisms we adopt, which can be subtle sometimes, are they helping us or hurting us? I think that's the first question. As you're hearing already, I'm saying, for me, I've figured that out. Now it's just a means of sort of shedding those mechanisms, which is easier said than done. That takes time. But coming to the conclusion around that is really key first, because we have to see what's creating peace in our life and what's not. And even I would say what's creating peace for others and what's not. And that's a little harder to discern, but either way, we can do some reflection on that. So based on that question, if you feel you have a kind of insight into that, then and you feel it's in line with what I'm saying here, not that you have to be, you could completely disagree with me, right? But I'm just saying if you feel like the reflection leads you to this position of, okay, it is a little more peaceful to seek to understand, that's how to do that, right? So I think this is going to be part one in a two-parter. And so in the next one, I'll talk about a little bit more means on how to seek to understand. This was kind of like more what it is, the difference between the two, coming to the conclusion, like which is more skillful. And in the next talk, I'll share, I guess, some core ways, practices, ways I work with seeking to understand versus control. So yeah, thanks so much for listening, and please join me for part two, where I'll talk a little bit more about this, and especially some practices. Okay, thanks so much.